Welcome back to episode 5. I've got sinus trouble, so I will try to be talking as little as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to be coughing directly into this microphone, and I do not want that to happen. But I've been promising this for a while, and Pastor Johnson, my pastor, awesome man, glad to have him.
Glad to be here.
Start with question 1.
Okay.
What is the first thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word gentleman?
Well, I think of somebody who is a real man, strong and firm in his beliefs and such, but is kind and gentle at the same time. That's what comes to mind, and that minds his manners and has self-control. He can be upset, as all of us can, but he doesn't fly off the handle. He has a lot of self-control and handles it right. Handles himself right.
Right.
So that's kind of what comes to mind when I think of a gentleman.
I mean, even the Apostle Paul said, "In your anger, do not sin."
Yep.
I know I'm paraphrasing that because I can't remember exactly what he said.
Be angry and sin not. Basically what he said. And so, being a gentleman is not that you're not a man, but that you're just handling it with grace, and just not flying off the handle and being rude and crude. And so that's kind of how I look at it.
And that's a good way to look at it. That's the way most of the people that I've had on have looked at it.
Yeah.
Like Colton and Jeremy have looked at it that same way.
Yeah.
They give close to the same answer.
Yeah.
Not exactly the same, but.
Yeah.
So what do you think is something every gentleman should know?
Well, he should know that just because he is a gentleman doesn't mean he's not a man. You can handle things in different ways. Somebody crude and rude may try to handle things with his fists. That usually doesn't go too well.
Generally, for either one, doesn't usually end very well.
Not saying that it shouldn't, that there's never a time for when you have to do that, but generally speaking, it's a negative way to handle things. Looking for the best way, the gracious way. So I think that's one thing they should know. That doesn't make you any less of a man. In fact, it makes you more of a man, because it's easy to go that route and scream and holler and hit and fight. It takes a lot more for a man to use self-control, and it reminds me of that proverb that Solomon said in the book of Proverbs about, a man who keeps his spirit under control is greater than a man who can take a city, So wisdom and grace is better than might and power, So that's kind of how I look at that. So
that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd say on that.
You could handle something with your fist, and there's a time and place, but that's not every single
like
time.
An emergency situation or life and death, you would need to, or if you're defending your family and somebody's trying to harm them and there's nothing else you can do. I mean, when somebody's out of control, they're not going to listen to your speech, so sometimes you have to, unfortunately,
it's a sad world we live in. It really is. But it's an unfortunate thing that has to happen sometimes.
Yeah, it does. Unfortunately.
So what do you think is something every gentleman should own?
Wow, that's good.
It took me a couple weeks to come up with all these questions, actually.
Well, Uh, I think a good quality Bible. Of course, I'm a pastor, so I'm gonna. You knew I was gonna say that.
Actually, I did not see
The
that
Word
one.
of God comes first. But I think a good quality Bible that's readable, you know, that you're really going to use. Um, Maybe even one that has some study things in it.
And that's the one I like. I like study Bibles because I like to learn about
Yeah,
different what this word means and what
yeah.
this place is. And
And I've got a Thompson Chain Bible, and I like that. That's more of a preacher's Bible, but anybody can use it. But I also like the Premier Study Bible. Uh, it's a totally an apostolic
mhm,
Bible, that goes all the way back to the Apostles' Doctrine, and I like that one. So those are the two that I know there's a bunch of them, but those are the two that I prefer, you know. But I think that's one thing. I think a good pocket knife. I like a. I think I brought one with me. I like this one because I wear a lot of suits and stuff,
mhm.
and it's small. It's not bulky, but it's got like a scissors on it. Sometimes you need one of those.
I've
It's
come to
got a
points where I had to cut threads off my
yeah.
suits and shirts, and
It's got a little knife, and then it's got a file, for your sometimes your fingernails may get a snag on them. You got that on there. And then the one I really like is it's got a toothpick in case
okay, that's really I like that one actually.
where something's in your teeth and those starting to look nasty or feel bad, you can get it. And then this one's even got a tweezers. Every now and then something gets in your fingers, or a piece of wood if you're working with something
Hmm.
or outside. So I think that is one thing. And then
I
I
have
think a
like
good pair of
the
shoes.
most basic of all pocket knives,
Yeah, that one's a
but
real knife.
it's just
But
big doesn't make it a real knife, but
it's like that's almost a miniature sword.
there's pretty much. And I just like the belt, the pocket clip, just because
Yeah,
I carry
and
too much
everybody's
in my
different.
pocket with
Everybody
keys and
likes
all that kind
different
of stuff.
things. So there's no right and wrong, but there's times you need a knife. I think a good pair of shoes, basic, dress pair and a casual pair where it's comfortable, but it supports your feet, you know, because you know, if you're miserable with your feet, you're going to be miserable all over.
Mhm.
Because it's like one guy said, I heard an old preacher say, you need a good car, you need a good pair of shoes, and you need a good bed because you're going to be in one of the three all the time. So, uh, but I think, good pocket. Now, another thing I think is a good watch. I know some people like we're in the high tech age, and I know
Mhm,
a lot of people like the Apple Watch, and it does a lot of stuff. I've never been an Apple Watch guy. I got the iPhone, so I
mhm.
do most. If I want something to do that, I'll do that. But some people like the iPhone. I mean the Apple Watch, so they can monitor different things, and they're walking and stuff, and they have access to stuff on their wrist. That reminds me when I was a boy, the Dick Tracy comics. That was a thing of the future when I was a kid. But anyway, I just like a regular watch that just tells
Same.
time, and that's what I got. So I think a good watch, and I like the automatic watches. It's not that the other's not a problem, but I don't like changing batteries. So,
That's
but
one of
that
my
everybody's
annoyances.
different, but the other's fine, and I've had a bunch of those in the past. But
I have a couple watches sitting at home waiting on a battery, and I just can't find the time to go look for one.
yeah, so I like I think a good watch, so they can be places when they need to be, and and um, and all of that. And I think another thing is a calendar. It don't have to be like this little one, but I've got a desk calendar that I keep. When I get engagements, I can put them on, or appointments, I can put it on. And also here, like if I'm at a conference and somebody invites me to do something or come speak at their church, I can just pull it out. That way I don't double book. But everybody needs one. They don't have to be a preacher to have one,
Right.
because Everybody's got appointments, from dental appointments to doctor's appointments to
And that's
meeting with
that's
friends, and
most of
that
what I
way
keep track of is
that
doctors and medicine.
and because some places will even charge you if you don't show up. You know, they've got that in their policy, so there's no sense in that. You know, so and it keeps you from double booking and creating issues for yourself where you might get mad, lose
Mhm.
your gentlemanness. And so, the way I look at being a gentleman too is it kind of reminds me of the old, when I was in college back in California, I took a course in English history. And one of the things, the we went back into the old days of the English, from the first kings way back in the 300s and 400s, I believe, 700s. Uh, the Middle Ages all the way through. Well, the days of the knights, when that came about, uh, and the knights had the right to, if a slave or a serf was they were freezing, they had a right to kill them and open their guts up and warm their hands up, which was crazy. But the original knights were very sophisticated guys that would fight for their their kings and whatever. But they were, um, also known to be what we would consider gentlemen. And I believe that's where the handshake originated, if I'm not
I
mistaken,
think it is actually.
because usually they would carry a sword, in that hand. And so when they would meet somebody and they'd shake hands, that meant we're not going to fight right now. We're gonna do it a different. We're gonna talk
Mhm.
and be kind to one another. And so that's a sign of kind of being a gentleman, where you're still a man, but I'm going to put the sword away and we're going to talk and do it diplomatically, I guess.
Right.
So
For once, we're not going to settle this.
so I think that's a good way to look at being a gentleman. Your hand can fight, but it can also be a sign of graciousness. And a gentleman has the power to do things that are strong and masculine,
Mm.
but he's choosing to be gracious with himself, and handle himself with self-control. And there's a book, Seth, the guy who wrote Shepherd of the Hills. They have a big drama in Branson on it. Uh, Harold Bell Wright. He also wrote a book, When a Man's a Man. And basically in that book, he's saying what makes a man is not his ability to fight. Anybody can do that. But a real man exercises self-control. And that's a great premise,
Mhm.
because anybody can scream, holler, kick, fight, punch, but somebody who uh, exercises self-control and says, I choose not to do that, that's not going to solve things. We've got to go to a higher level here, and that's hard to do. So I think that's a good part of being a man. Um, I think every man should also have at least one good suit. Some guys don't dress up a lot. I do, because I'm a pastor and I do a lot of services and whatnot. But I think every man needs at least maybe one good black suit for funerals, weddings, things like that. If not black, maybe navy or gray. And, nice pair of shoes, a good tie. Uh, and if you go to more church services, or you go to more business occasions, you probably need two or three at least,
Mm.
if not more. But that's up to everybody. Maybe some sport coats. But um, I, you know, I think in this age in which we live in, this may be controversial, but I think you may need uh, a firearm for protection, for your family, you know, because sometimes the cops don't get there in time. And if somebody
And
was
that's
breaking in or was,
completely valid.
I know like here at our church, we have had um, people break in and do vandalism, and the guy was high. And even the cops, they had to tase him like 3 times. If it would have been a regular person with unarmed, there would have been no chance for them, you know. But if the guy had found somebody, and their only way to be to save themselves and their family, if they had walked into the building, would have been if they had a firearm of some sort, you know. So I'm not promoting, you know, just killing people and shooting and that kind of violent lifestyle, but there are times when maybe even brandishing it could stop something worse from happening. Um,
I've heard it said from a radio show before. I believe it started in the 40s and 50s. It was a radio show called Dragnet.
yeah,
And they said if a criminal will shoot an armed police officer, there's nothing stopping him from shooting you.
yeah, yeah. Um, Another thing I think a gentleman needs is a good pen to write with, because I don't know how it is. Of course, I probably write more than a lot of people because I sign things for our church and write notes and stuff a lot. But not all pens are created equal. And I'm not saying they have to be a real expensive one. I like nice ones to. I like a nice one to carry wherever I go in case I have to sign something. But there are some really nice cheap pens just to keep in your office or your car or your at your desk or wherever that write really well. I think if I'm not mistaken, the G2, it's just a one you can get at Walmart. It's plastic, but it's nice.
Most of
So
the
those are some things.
most of the big pens, even though they're plastic and pretty like 10 cents a piece, they're really good at.
Yeah. Well, you know, so that's my take on that off the top of my head.
I just have two questions left.
Okay.
The second to the last one is, who do you see as a role model? Doesn't have to be someone in the Bible, but if there
Yeah.
is someone.
Yeah. Um, you know, of course, Jesus Christ, because to me, he was the epitome of a man because he was strong and yet gracious. I mean, he would face down the Pharisees and call them serpents, vipers to their face. I mean, that's pretty bold because they could have arrested him. Well, they did actually crucify him, but um, he could do that when needed, but he could also be gracious. And they say that most people, when they're flogged, a lot of criminals would die from the flogging. It was so vicious. So Jesus had to be a strong person to survive that and carry his own cross after that happened. So, and yet he could be kind, gracious, but strong when he needed to be. So, without being super spiritual, of course, I'm going to say him. I'm a pastor. But, you know, I assisted a great man years ago um, that I think epitomized being a gentleman, and his name was Johnny Godare. He pastored a great church, and he was a great leader, Pentecostal leader in the Pentecostal movement. But he also, uh, people that knew him would say uh, he was a man of velvet and steel because he was a very strong preacher, but he was also very gracious and very kind, you know, in how he operated. And one preacher said, he said, I look at him as being like a steel fist with a velvet glove on it. And I think that's a good way to consider, you know, being a gentleman. You're strong, but you got some grace about it. And but he was a good role model because he could be strong and even preach strong things or deal with things in his church as needed, but at the same time, he was very gracious. He wasn't crude and rude and mean spirited to people, you know. So to me, he was a role model. My dad was like that. My dad was a very strong man. Uh, I remember growing up, he would do box cars as an extra deal at his job. When they throw all the wood in the box car unsorted, he'd take it all out. That was a big job. And he was very strong. I remember as a boy feeling his muscles, just astonished that somebody could be that strong. But he was very gentle most of the time. He didn't he didn't flex his muscles. He didn't go picking fights, you know. But if something needed to be done, he'd do it. You know, he'd go straight up to whoever and say, "Deal with it," you know. But he wasn't antagonistic. You know, he was, and he always liked to stay. You know, even though he was a blue collar man, he liked he showered meticulously. You know, had a certain cologne he wore. He just liked to be clean when he was done working. You know, and he got along with people. But if something needed to be dealt with, he was willing to do it. You know, and when he was a younger man, before he became a Christian, he was quite a fighter. You know, so the Lord helped him temper that, and I'm glad because I'm when I got in my teens, I was glad he's living for God because I was a little smart mouth, you know, went through, you know, as all kids do, teenagers. He could have probably really hurt me otherwise. So, uh, not saying he didn't take care of me at times because he did, but, you know, he wasn't violent about it. Um, but he was a good role model. Those are the ones that come to mind.
Last one. Do you have any advice for aspiring gentlemen?
Yeah, just remember, you know, that um, if you want to be a true gentleman, that being a gentleman does not make you any less of a man. You can be strong in your beliefs, in your viewpoints, but the more gracious you are about the way you handle yourself, the better things go for you on your job. If you're single and you want to get married, it goes better than just barreling into things, you know, and um, getting upset. And I think women appreciate that. If you know, if a man's single, they see that he has self control. Uh, I think that speaks to them about what kind of father or husband he might be down the road. You know, um, so um, I would say just don't let your ego get the best of you and think, well, I got to be a he man, so I can't be kind. You know, don't buy into that. Um, so that's probably the biggest thing I'd say. Then I'd say just you know, whatever you're doing in life and your manhood is being displayed, keep it with some grace so that you don't just become I guess have a hard edge to your life because you know there was a day, you know, in the frontiersmen and stuff, those days, you know, you could do that because there was no, you weren't dealing, you were out in the woods. You know, it's different when you're not around a lot of people. But most of us today deal with so many people. Then with the internet and all the social media, you know, you need to have a little more grace, or otherwise you start losing friends
Mm-hmm.
and you start losing effectiveness because they'll just go somewhere else to see, you know, to seek advice or conversation or whatever. That's kind of how I think about it. So I hope that helps.
I mean, it's good advice. It is. Just you can be sitting on social media and it can ruin your whole day.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah, some people use it as a rant and complaint and, poor me and all that. And nobody really, that doesn't help things get better.
because I see those and I just start laughing just
Yeah.
because you
People
took
just
the
turn
time out
them
of
off.
your busy job to go sit in the break room and set up a camera just to scream at it.
Yeah.
That's the way I look. That's
Yeah.
my personal thought process.
And I'm not saying at times, if it was a legitimate thing, let's say a company did you wrong and you tried to talk to them, they wouldn't. I've seen deals where they said, so this is my last resort. And sometimes that has an impact. Sometimes it don't. But sometimes the people will not listen. That's your only way. So I can understand some of that, but a lot of it's just no control, and they just rant and rave all the time about every little thing. Pretty soon it gets old.
It
You
does.
just would unfollow or whatever,
Particularly with this most recent election, it's the amount of people.
Yeah,
And that's one of those moments where I just can't help but just sit back and chuckle a little.
yeah. Well, it was amazing talking about that just recently. I read something. It was pretty interesting. It was written by a liberal, but it was submitted to the USA Today. It was about Trump since he's been elected. And they basically said, I don't like Trump. I didn't ever like Trump for his first time, nor didn't vote for him this time. But they said, I have to admit, not his personality, but his policies. I think they're helping America. And it's helping our country a lot more than I thought it would. And I thought that was pretty uh, gracious of the person and pretty uh, good way to handle it. Let's say, look, I don't like him, but I have to say some of this is helping us then be better than we were, even though the other man might have been my man and I liked him. Things weren't going as good for us overall as a country. So that can go back to being a gentleman. You might want to rant and rave, but just sit back and objectively look and say, can I get some good out of this? So,
And he hasn't even reached his 100-day mark yet until later in April, I believe.
yeah,
Until toward
probably.
the end ish.
Yeah.
And he's already almost completely
Well,
turned this country at a whole 180.
well, especially with the border, and that really didn't have to be with legislation. It's like they said, you didn't need a new law; you needed a new president. And unfortunately, and I try to be respectful of all of our presidents, even the ones that I disagree with more.
And
And I don't
I
always agree
completely
with
agree with
Trump,
that one.
but and I tried to pray for Biden and honor him as our president, but he really didn't do a whole lot on that area. And he kept putting it back to the legislators, and he could have probably done a lot more. And it shows. You look at how high the numbers were, and all of a sudden they could drop to almost nothing. There was no new law. They just knew there was a new sheriff in town.
Even some countries that were had our name on a list are saying we're not doing it no more.
Yeah,
You got him in there. He's gonna do whatever he pleases.
yeah,
We're not taking part in that.
yeah, yeah.
That'd be amazing to have him on as a guest on this show. That would be so cool. But I don't. I'm not gonna say it won't happen. I just don't think it will happen.
Yeah, you never know. Life's funny. You got me on here. I'm teasing you, Seth. Oh Lord, that's funny. But
But
no,
from the very beginning, I wanted you to be on it anyway.
yeah,
But it's just a great thing because I wanted it to round out as episode number 5, just as like a uh, there's a word like a milestone episode.
yeah. Well, we all need to be gentlemen that are men. We can still be a man. but be gentle about it as much as possible. And then at times when, as it were, the boxing gloves have to come off, then so be it, you know. But most of the time, you don't have to do that. So,
Most of the time, it just can be settled just speaking.
yeah.
And I know a lot of men, their egos get in the way because as a man, I've been there.
Yeah. It does. It can happen, and it can happen quick too.
But I think that should round out this episode.
Okay.
But as far as just now, I lost where I was going. I know it was going to happen eventually.
To be too much of a gentleman.
I know it was going to happen eventually. But just to everyone watching, I know there's a few, and even on social media, it's getting quite a few more. Getting a lot of good feedback so far. Every now and then there's a negative one, but I choose to ignore those because this is what I felt I should do.
Yeah.
So I'm doing it.
Yeah. Well, it's always good to listen to criticism, but filter it. You know, if you listen to it and you look at it and there is some grain of truth, take that away. But if there's not, and it's just somebody's belching on you, just throw that in the trash can and move forward. You know, that's the way I've always looked at it. It could indicate something good that you can get out of it, but some people, it's like they thrive on negativity, and they don't have a good day unless they try to ruin somebody else's. You know, so
I've noticed that especially. Just being out there a little more than I used to be.
Yeah.
But as far as everyone watching, don't forget to like it, subscribe it. If you have a topic you'd like me to bring up with a specific person, maybe we could have Pastor Johnson back on again sometime in the future. If there's something you'd like to have him discuss specifically, leave that in the comments because I'd like to know. Couldn't think of it. I don't know if there was something, but thank you for coming.
You're
welcome. Glad
You're
you can
welcome.
you can make time to be over here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have come, and I hope it all goes well out in internet land or social media land for you.
Also, the person who I have to thank for using the church as filming, just because I have nowhere else to do it. I usually try to keep it on Sundays when everything's up and running anyway, and it's not hot in one of these rooms. Like, it's getting a little warm in here now, just because everything's been shut off. But but anyway, thank you again for coming.
You're welcome.
And have a good one. God bless.